All right. As always, every week, I'll give you all an extra minute or two just to log on. I love it when the people join, and then we will get started. Hope everyone had a great day today. If you want to know a little bit about my day, me being Michael Skillern, you can head over to commentime.online on Instagram. I kind of posted a little reflection after a third grade music class I had today. You ever teach a class and just feel like, man, like I'm in mid-season form right now? I think it will be the equivalent to a basketball player. You shoot one shot and you make it. You're like, okay. You make two in a row. You're like, okay. You make that third shot in a row, and you're like, yes, today is my day. Pass me the ball. I'm feeling it. And that's how I felt with the three or four activities I did today. The first one hit, the second one hit. By the time the third one hit, I was set for the rest of the day. I feel like with arts teachers, the subject that we're teaching is so much more emotional than a lot of the other subjects. And of course, all classes can kind of gauge the success of their lessons based on engagement. But the difference between the arts and other subjects is that our class literally does not function without engagement. If you're teaching art and the students aren't actively trying to create something visual, then the class just doesn't work. If you're teaching theater and the students aren't actively participating, it just doesn't work. So I don't know about you all, but for me, when the students were engaged after those first two, three activities, I knew like I'm feeling it today. All right, it's been 2 minutes. Let's get right to it. Welcome, everyone. After a 1 week hiatus, we are back with our Wisdom Wednesday webinar series here at Common Time Online. Once again, my name is Michael Skillern, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Common Time. And I have been charged with educating our users, educating the public, and getting our product, our platform, our community in front of as many eyes as possible through a lot of different creative measures, one of which being this weekly webinar series. Thank you to all that did, but if you are on the list of people that are unable to join, aka Santa's naughty list, we will be reposting this webinar as we do with all the others in a blog post that'll be on our website at commontime.online/blog. And we will also post those links in our interactive Facebook groups, Common Time for Artists and Common Time for Educators. Today, we're talking about one of those buzzwords, one of those new words that's been added to all of your teacher evaluations, one of those new words that is spoken about in all the research for you ivory tower folks, one of those new words that schools are putting in their mission statements and in their mottos and in their purposes and whatever else you call those phrases that schools have. And that is the big D word, Dunkin' Donut. No. Differentiation. Today we're going to talk about differentiation. I'm currently working on a school that has an idea that they can differentiate by giving students these assessments that kind of isolate and track their learning through terms of like spatial awareness, verbal, nonverbal. And they do these assessments that give them some type of score in those areas, and then we're supposed to take that data and then insert it into our lesson plans to make sure that we are promoting their strengths and also trying to build their weaknesses. But in the arts, if you're teaching visual art, your students are working in nonverbal communication every day through shapes and symbols. Your students are working with verbal communication every day by describing their art, by making an artist plan, by doing artist research, doing a process journal. Your students are using spatial reasoning every day. So it's kind of hard to differentiate a lesson in a subject that's already differentiated in those areas. So the approach that I like to use with differentiation, a lot of this comes from the IB Principles to Practice documents, and also from Tanya Latanzio, who I was blessed to be able to take part in a transformative PD with. She's kind of one of the world authorities on differentiation, especially in international education circuit. And it kind of uses a more generalized method of differentiation that's aimed at giving your students a more personal connection to the learning that starts with them and that doesn't start with their performance on an assessment. Like, we could all talk about the problems or the great things about assessment all day, but I think part of me just doesn't like using assessment to determine your strategy for differentiation. I understand that, knowing that a student struggles with verbal communication, so you need to structure their lesson or their assignments or their task or their experience to do this or that can be very helpful. But I think that the way that I like to approach differentiation, the way that I was taught about differentiation, is a little bit better and a little bit more student-centered and not data-centered. Example, if you're teaching in the international circuit, you have a school with a lot of English language second learners. How can an all English-based assessment claim that the student has low verbal skills? Did you test them in Arabic? Did you test them in Chinese? You see what I'm saying? An example my grandmother used to give me is back when she was a child. She remembers kind of one of these aptitude tests that was looking to talk about vocabulary words. And there was a picture of a purse, maybe a bag similar to this one. And it was, the classic thing. All the Black kids called it a pocketbook. All the white kids called it a purse or maybe a handbag. The correct answer was purse. So now they're saying that this population of the student has low verbal communication skills. When, it's just so hard to differentiate assessment, how can an assessment be our basis for differentiation? Anywho, I digress. I'll be here all night. We know you don't have that time. I don't either. As you can see from this cup, I'm a daddy, and babies don't give you that much time to yourself. So let me take a sip and let's get into it. Okay, 2. All right. I already gave you the disclaimer that a lot of these ideas aren't coming from me. I have connected a lot of these ideas to the arts, which I'm going to try to deliver to you today, but I didn't create any of this. Any buzzwords or vocabulary words you hear, they didn't come from me. I took a lot of this from the IB Principles to Practice documents and also from Tanya Latanzio, who I was fortunate enough to attend a PD with, but I tried to give them credit while also spinning it for my subject area and for our passion area, and then giving it to you. First things first, I want to give you a challenge if you're listening to this. And that's actually our first differentiation tip. I want to give you a challenge. I challenge you to keep track of some of the things that we discussed here today and make some examples for how they can work in your classroom right now. I think professional development opportunities that lack things that are actionable tomorrow are a waste of money. Every PD that I've been to, because I had a really great principal at my last school, we left with something that I can try tomorrow. I could have tried it that day, but it was a teacher in-service day, so I couldn't. And those to me were worth their weight in gold because I literally walked away with something like, oh, I'm going to do this tomorrow. They had us creating things, da-da-da-da-da. I challenge you to connect something that we say to your personal, one of your classes that you have that you're going to tomorrow. Why do we do that? When you start off your lessons with a challenge, it could be something as simple as like, there's a band piece called American Elegy by Frank Tekeli. You could say, I challenge you to think of a moment that you were proud to be American. Then maybe the next day or a ticket out the door, you have some students verbalize those thoughts and those feelings to you. When you're setting a challenge like that at the beginning of your lessons, you are automatically differentiating because number one, the answer to the challenge is open-ended and vary and will be different for every student. Once you give them that challenge, each student now has a personal goal to achieve during that lesson. If that's not open-ended differentiation, I don't know what is. Going back to my speech on assessment, that assessment that was targeted at highlighting how we can differentiate. An open-ended challenge like this, we didn't necessarily tell them to speak in words. We didn't tell them to speak in images. A student could bring back a picture. A student could perform a part of a dance they did during a 4th of July celebration. A student could draw an image. A student could write something. You're giving the student the choice on how to respond, and then naturally they're going to respond based on their strengths. Then you could take that response. Let's say you challenge the student to think of a time that they were proud to be American, and maybe you make it an assignment later and you accept responses on your learning management system. A student could post a picture of a fireworks show from Independence Day. I'm speaking from the context of an American. They chose to use shapes and symbols as their form of communication because that's their strength. Then later, you can ask them to do the opposite. Maybe then you ask them to write. Now you're targeting their weaknesses, and you didn't need a test that was written by a for-profit company that's sitting in a skyscraper somewhere to tell you how to do that. Start off your lessons with a challenge. That's a great way to differentiate. It's a great way to differentiate. Step 2. Oh, that's 4. Step 2. Concept-based learning. This is another topic that's highly discussed in academics. And in layman's terms, concept-based learning is teaching in a way that teaches that your content is secondary to a larger, timeless, generalized, overarching theme. For example, if you are painting landscapes in your visual arts class, your students are most likely not going to be painters. Your students are not going to remember what perspective and subject in line and all these different principles of design mean in 20 years. But what they will remember is communication. The goal of us painting landscapes is not to learn how to paint trees. The goal is that we're communicating to someone who doesn't live here what here looks like. And that is something that's timeless, generalized. Your students for the rest of their lives will be communicating ideas to someone else who doesn't know them. I think it was Kierkegaard or another famous philosopher who coined the term "get the picture," and he kind of defined communication as the process of forming a picture in your head and then sending that picture to someone else. And whenever you have a miscommunication, it's because they literally didn't get the picture. So that's kind of in a quick 30-second definition of what concept-based learning is. Now, the IB helps us by identifying some concepts. The concepts I use in my class often are identity. When you're painting a self-portrait, it's not about the painting. The goal of painting a self-portrait is forming an identity. When you're teaching a drama class, it's not about remembering the lines. The goal of them reading that monologue is they're creating an identity. Your students will always be creating an identity for the rest of their lives. Then some of them will become parents and they will help another person create their identity. Another concept we use is creativity. When you are learning choreography, the point of that dance class is not to memorize the pirouette on count 7. The point is that through the process of rehearsal, your students are thinking creatively. They're forming a goal, they're practicing that goal. They're realizing, part of this goal doesn't work. They're changing that goal and they're realizing it to an end project. Pirouettes, not important for the rest of their life. Creative thinking, key. I said this in an earlier webinar. Steve Jobs, without creativity, doesn't make the iPhone. He's probably a coder or an engineer at someone else's company. Henry Ford, without creativity, doesn't produce the assembly line. He probably makes cars like everyone else was at that time. He's just an engineer. The concept of development, the concept of building blocks, the concept of getting better at something. You orchestra directors out there, learning the notes and learning the positions and learning the bow hold, that's not important. The process of knowing nothing, then doing stuff and knowing something, that's the goal. That's the concept. That's something that they'll never stop doing. Communication, we talked about. Aesthetics, that's another important one. The fact that your singers do not sing amazingly beautifully, I kind of connecting those adverbs there, that's not as important as teaching them how to identify beauty and being able to recognize the art for what it is and the art form for what it is. We all know this secondhand. We say we're not raising professional musicians, we're raising people that will enjoy music for life. And that's what the knowledge of aesthetics is. You're teaching aesthetics, you're not teaching singing per se. And the last concept that I use frequently is the concept of change. When you're teaching a photography unit and your school's fortunate enough to have a darkroom, learning how to mix the chemicals and the process of developing the photos, it's irrelevant in a year for most of your students. But learning the concept that you can start with this, poke and prod at it, then change it to this, that concept of nothing stays the same, that's what's important in life. And when you teach through concepts and not just through your content, I know the content's important. The content is the gas. The concept should be your vehicle. When you're teaching that way, you are differentiating because your students are making their own personal connection to that concept because they don't have a personal connection to playing fanfare for band in 7th grade band class. There's no personal connection there, but there is a personal connection to this idea of development or this idea of communication because all of our students develop, they all communicate, they all change, they all see beauty. Okay, so we talked about some ways we can implement those concepts. Here's some more. How to implement communication. What is this painting saying? What is this phrase in the music saying? Why is it different from the one before? What is the trumpet 2 part saying? Why is my part important even though I'm not sitting first chair? What is my character trying to achieve? If their end goal in the piece is to kill the main character, that should inform how your students are acting. What are you communicating? Aesthetics. Why is this piece so beautiful? We're singing this gospel song. Why do people love it? Why is this song sang or sung in church? I have the melody at measure 40. Why is that important? What am I adding to the beauty of this piece? Change. Look at how my photo is changing over time in the darkroom. What happened to that change? Did I instigate that change? Did anything hinder that change? These are some ways you can connect the concepts to your arts teaching that you're doing now. And when you teach based on concepts, you're allowing the students to form a personal connection to your content through the lens of the concept. Once again, most of your students are not going to have a personal connection to painting still life. They're just not. But they do have a personal connection to these ideas of identity formation, creation, aesthetics. They do have a personal connection to those things. And that's what we're trying to construct, is that personal connection. All right, so what is differentiation? And once again, a lot of this comes from other sources that I mentioned earlier. It's not for me, I'm no genius. Differentiation is relevant, it's rigorous. It's not just easier work for that lower 50% of your class. It's flexible and varied. Everything doesn't have to be differentiated all the time. Differentiation does not have to be difficult for the teacher. It's student-centered, and it's a combination of whole class, small group, and individual tasks. Here's what differentiation is not. It's not individualized instruction. Differentiation is opportunity to show your learning in a different way, not different learning experiences for every child. You can have a communal learning experience and have it still be differentiated by allowing your students to form a personal connection with it, by allowing them to hand in alternate versions of the same assessment, by allowing them opportunities to show their learning in a different way. Differentiation is not just for the outliers. It's not just for the highest 10% and that low 10%. Differentiation is not tailoring, giving a struggling student easier work. That's hurting them. Giving a smarter student really, really hard work, that's hurting them too, because part of their confidence comes from getting the answer right. You start giving that student questions that they're getting wrong all the time, you could really tank that learning experience for them. Where on the other hand, if your students are graphing things in a math class, maybe you allow this student to create graphs that showcase things from their personal life, like their height over time, versus the things that the rest of the class is doing. Same learning experience, different opportunity to show that learning experience. Maybe you have a student in that same math class who has already mastered the concept of a bar graph, but you have access to your computers in your classes, and now that student is mapping bar graphs in Excel, while with the same data that the other students are using to maybe color bar graphs in on a worksheet or a handout. How? Differentiation, the way that I learned it, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, works on 8 different planes. Write this down. You can differentiate in your class based on readiness. Is this the right grade level? Is this activity that we're doing hard enough, or is it easy enough for their classes? I once read a text that when you are introducing a topic or a subject or what have you to your students, your first learning experience should be something that 50% of the students are going to get right on the first try. An example could be if you are teaching a theater class and you're working on vocal inflection or diction and you wanted them to speak clearly and correctly. When you introduce that concept to them, you want to start with something that 50% of them are going to get right on the first try, like toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. You wouldn't start with Shelly sells seashells by the seashore on Sunday. You wouldn't start with that because you're starting off kind of on your back foot, You want to start in a position where the majority of your students are going to grasp that and be able to move on. And then first try, but you want to start from somewhere where you can catch the majority of the students. When you're fishing and you go out for that first cast of the day, you're going to throw that lure where all the fish are going to be. You're not going to start off in the spot where they're not. That's the spot you're going to move to after you've tried all the other ones. Differentiating based on readiness. Are you giving your students a provocation that based on their prior knowledge, some of them are ready for and some of them may not be ready for? Right then, you're differentiating. For in the band world, when you give your students a piece that's percussion heavy and has less involved wind parts, you're differentiating right there. Your students, your percussionists have something that they might not be ready for. They're going to have to rehearse that. But your wind players are having something that they are ready for. Right then, you have the same learning experience that's having a different effect on the different members of that group. Let me connect it to the other subjects. When you are in a theater class and you are working on doing a monologue, you may want to choose something that, once again, some students may be ready for, some students are not. Maybe the students that are ready for are going to have a deeper connection to it. Maybe there's more upside for learning for the students that are not ready for it. Maybe you I don't know. The examples here are endless. I kind of struggle with theater examples sometimes because that's not my wheelhouse. Let me see if I can make an example for dance. You could show them a move like the pirouette example from before. Some of your students may be ready for that. Some of your students may not be ready for that. The students that are ready, maybe you're working towards mastery, and the students that aren't ready, you're working towards just attempts, successful attempts, something like that. You can differentiate based on what your students are ready for, and you can isolate it. If you know your students' prior knowledge, you can decide when you want to do something that some students are ready for versus all. Maybe that can help you in your small grouping, for example. Number two, you can differentiate based on student interest. You can plan learning experiences that will impact certain students in a different way based on you knowing what their interests are. I'll go to theater because I finally got this one. If you do a musical, like let's say you do a High School Musical and you license that from Disney and you're going to do it, if this was 10 years ago, you know that your students are going to be quite interested in that. So already you have created different learning experiences for different students by piquing their interest. Are the students piquing their interest? Excuse me. Are the students actually interested in what they're doing? And then likewise, everything's not differentiated all the time. So if you pick something that piques half of your students' interest, you're still giving them a personal experience that maybe some of the other students won't have, but you'll find another way to differentiate so that those students are able to find a personal connection to that. Maybe the passion shown from the students who are interested can help you get through some of your lessons with more ease and inspire some of the others to increase their participation. You can differentiate your lessons based on the learner profile. This is something that comes from the International Baccalaureate that kind of has these adjectives that describe what the ideal learner should be. And those are the ideal learner should be knowledgeable, they should be a risk taker, they should be open-minded, balanced, they should be principled, reflective, caring, and they should be an inquirer, they should be an inquisitive. Maybe you are going to assign a learning experience that gives some students the opportunity to be knowledgeable. In my case, I work in a multicultural international school. So if we are singing an Arabic folk song, I'm giving some of my students the opportunity to be knowledgeable. I'm giving some of my other students the opportunity to be open-minded to something that they don't know. I'm giving my non-Arabic speaking students the opportunity to be inquisitive about what does this mean? I'm giving my non-Arabic students the opportunity to be risk takers. I'm giving my Arabic students the opportunity to be principled by taking a leadership role in the class because they know what this is. In a visual arts class, I saw a class that was once doing artist research, and they were doing artist research about like manga and anime, like Japanese cartoon characters. Some of the students had the opportunity to be knowledgeable once again, and some of the students had the opportunity to be inquirers because they knew less about that. It's a similar aspect to that concept of readiness. You choose things that students are ready or not ready for based on your knowledge of their prior experience. Yeah. The effect. How are students going to be affected by this piece or by this activity or by this project? Emotionally, physically, spiritually? How are they going to be affected by what you're learning? If you are doing To Kill a Mockingbird as a stage play, we all know, if you've read that book, that book has racial undertones. You're giving some of your students a chance to be affected in a personal, reflective sense. Maybe they're people of color. You're giving other students that don't fall into that category a chance to be affected in a different way, where they are maybe looking at what happened in there, looking at what's happening in their lives now. What is the effect that your students are getting from this? You may choose a task that, for example, like the artist research on anime, some of your students aren't into it. You're giving them the opportunity to be affected by something that may be difficult because of lacking interest. That's going to cause them to persevere. It's going to cause them to be resilient. They're going to have a different personal connection. With some of your other students are going to have a different effect from that learning experience. Content. What knowledge, understanding, skills are being learned? Are you differentiating your content? Our music teachers, are you just playing notes and rhythms every day? You're not responding to music, you're not composing, you're not recording, you're not writing program notes, you're not listening to music, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. Unfortunately, even though I know you've got that concert coming up, you're not differentiating your content. One of my favorite art teachers, not only does she do the art creation, but she does the art process journaling. She does the artist research. She does gallery walks where they walk around the school to find some of the elements of design. She's offering architecture, that's going to grab some kids. She's offering writing, that's going to grab some kids. She's offering research, that's going to grab some kids. She's offering the actual production of the art, that's going to grab some kids. So when she finishes that unit and she's grading your research, your journal, and your final product, maybe you're not a painter, that part didn't grab you, but you killed it on your process journal, you killed it on your artist research, and you were able to identify the principles of design out in the actual school building. That's 3 out of 4 of the categories. Here's a student that's a bad painter who's gonna get a good grade because that task, that unit was differentiated. Notice how I said the unit was differentiated, not every individual task. At the end of the day, the kid's got to paint. The student has to deliver a monologue. The student has to show how to do a jump. The student has to play the B flat scale. We're not saying everything's differentiated. Number 6, the process, the sequence of learning experiences. Are you differentiating how you get from point A to point B? Preparing for a concert in the music world. Are you doing some listening? Maybe some of your students are great listeners. Are you having discussions? Maybe some of your students are great at verbalizing the feelings and the emotions, and they can kind of speak words to some of the things that you're trying to describe to your students. We get caught up so much in the passion for music. It's like, how can you not see how beautiful the B section is? They don't know. Are you bringing in guest artists on the Common Time platform to differentiate the process? Are you differentiating the sequence of the learning experiences? Or are you doing artist research, process journal, produce art every single time? Are you doing that every single time? Maybe instead of that, you start with a provocation. Paint a landscape or draw a landscape with the crayon. You're getting them active first. That's going to grab students in a different way than the way you did it the first time. Next, the final product. What is the final product for a set of experiences? This was really key for an educator I hold dear to my heart, Lars Jefferson, when we worked together in China. We would often do these reflections that are huge in the IB. If you're working in the IB, you know. He would give students the opportunity to draw their reflection with a visual art piece. We've had a student write a comic on, it was maybe 4 or 5 scenes about their reflection at the end of the concert. We've had students write paragraphs. He has interviewed students to get their reflection. He's had students turn in paragraphs, like I said. He's had a student submit an image that their parents took of the concert and they wrote captions for that image. All of those different methods are achieving the same goal, which is reflection. Are you differentiating the final product? I'm trying to think of an example from a monologue. Maybe do your students have the freedom to find their own monologue? Do your students have the freedom to take the monologue they're learning and change the characters, change the names, change the narrative? If the purpose is them if the purpose is them to memorize lines and deliver it, why does it have to be these lines? The goal still the same. The standard was still met. The criteria was still achieved. The objective was still met. Learning environment, the physical setup of your learning space. Are you taking the kids outside to play? Are you dancing in the foyer of the school for the students? Are you even doing it virtually in your music classes? Are you allowing them to record themselves on soundtrack maybe and maybe listen back to it right then in real time? That's like a quasi digital learning environment. Are you actually going outside to paint those landscapes? And it could be something as simple as changing up your seating chart, having your students choose their own space in the room when they're doing individual work. Having, a lot of primary rooms do this, having a reading corner or an art corner where students are doing this things, they can go places. Having centers. You know, I have a young baby, and one thing that my wife taught me and I've heard echoed from other people is the concept of changing the environment. If your baby's crying in the kitchen, if you take them in the bedroom, a lot of times they might stop. Just because you've changed the environment, you have completely shaken their world to the point where the reason why they were upset may not be as important as the fact that they just moved locations. Readiness, interest, learner profile, effect, content, process, product, and learning environment. These are some of the main ways that you can check for differentiation. Ways to differentiate in the different classrooms. In the music classroom, in band, are you sight reading constantly? That's a differentiation for readiness. That's differentiating for content. That's differentiating for interest. You've got music none of them are interested in. They've got to actually focus. That's differentiating on process. We're not rehearsing this. In the theater class, if you're doing costume design, do your students have the option to submit different articles of clothing? Now you're differentiating for product. Are you allowing your students to do research for their costume independently? Now you're differentiating for interest. They're going to make one of those Uchiha clan capes from Naruto. Now they're super interested. In the dance class, if you're asking them to learn 30 seconds of choreography for a project and they're going to present it, maybe teach it to the class. Are you allowing them to draw inspiration from their own experiences or prior knowledge? Now you're differentiating on the effect. That student's going to have a personal effect, but having that connection to something. The other students are going to have an effect, be differentiated by process because their teacher's not teaching them. It's going to be different. Here's some ways you can differentiate in your arts classes with these methods. Centers. Sending your students to different centers. I'll go back to my artist example. When you're doing the provocation, where they're going to be looking at a set of landscapes. Maybe you got a book from your library. That could be center one. And you've got a group there just looking through books and taking Post-it notes to highlight the ones that they like. Now you're finding their interest. Group center number 2 could be a open laptop that has 3 Wikipedia pages open of artists that were famous for landscapes. And you're having the students browse through what they see about these different artists to maybe see their style. Center number 3 could be a puzzle. There's a puzzle there that each group will collectively work on. Maybe they've only got 5 minutes and it's a decent sized puzzle. And they're putting together puzzle pieces of a landscape, something tactile, something engaging. And center number 4, they may have maybe a large sheet, one of those flip board pieces of paper and some markers, and they've got time to actually draw a quick landscape based on what's outside their window, something quick. And then you could send different students to each one of those groups and rotate it. What does that do? You're differentiating the process. You're differentiating the product. Each one of them is bringing something new at the end of that each time. You're differentiating for readiness. Some of the students are going to be great readers and they're going to be ready for that Wikipedia page. Some of the students are going to not have great spatial awareness. They're not ready to do a puzzle. You're going to be differentiating on content. That's 4 different types of content being exposed to the students there. And you're going to be differentiating based on learner profile because you're building knowledge. You're taking a risk by drawing with that marker. You are being reflective in that you can look through this picture book. You're being an inquirer in the fact that you have to put together that puzzle. Flexible grouping. Do you have your students in the same group for the entire term? I know with COVID, myself included, we were asked to kind of group the students and keep their seating chart consistent for contact tracing purposes. But assuming that's not the case, are you grouping flexibly? Are you having large groups and small groups? Are you grouping native speakers with second language learners? Are you joining some of the groups? Independent study. Are you offering opportunities for the students to work independently? Okay. Next, we've talked about concept-based learning, challenges, the ways to differentiate, some strategies. Inquiry is another big key to differentiation. Are you asking your students more questions than statements that you're telling them? They don't always have to answer these questions immediately. We know timing is a big factor when you're planning these lessons. Are you allowing the students the opportunity to ask questions? When they're asking these questions or when you ask them certain questions, especially answer questions where they might all have different answers, you are inherently differentiating that task because all the students are going to have a personal connection to that task or that learning experience based on their answer to that question. For example, when you are in your dance class and you're learning certain choreography, you can just ask the student, how do my legs feel when I perform this skill? Next thing you know, all the students are focused on their legs and all of their legs feel differently. Now they're thinking about, I don't care what Cindy's doing. My teacher asked me, how do my legs feel? Now they're not comparing. Now their process to learning is different. Now the content that they're receiving is different because their body's telling them something different from what Cindy's body is telling them. If the students can go into their learning with questions, it helps them guide their learning in a way that is student-centered. Are you asking the right questions to your students? Here's some inquiry-based activities you can do. Conceptual representation. Are you allowing your students opportunities to represent the concepts in different ways? If you are doing a self-portrait and you know that's your end product, yes, we know, but let's differentiate the process. Why don't you take one of those lessons and allow the students to express their identity in a different way? Maybe they're not the best at painting and they can't get out what they really feel that way. Maybe they want to bring in a photo and talk about it. Maybe they want to show and tell and bring in an item. Are you letting them represent that concept of identity in a different way? A concept walk / listen. If you are dancing and you are focusing on the concept of aesthetics, you're talking about beauty. Why don't you take a walk around the school and see if the students can find beauty away from the art? Sometimes I've heard musicians say this. I had a band director tell me once that he doesn't even like going to the symphony because he's almost too dialed in. You know, he can't really enjoy it. It's not a pleasurable experience for him. It's probably, if you work at Google and you're a coder, looking at code isn't fun to you, it's work. It used to be fun when you were 17, but now it's work. Why don't you find beauty in something else? Okay. Those are some ways. There's two ways that you can kind of promote inquiry. Another one that I love doing is the Post-it note provocation. Lac Le Monde. That's another popular band piece and a folk tune about a lake. Why don't you, before you start learning that piece of music, show a picture of the lake, hand out Post-it notes, and give your students 3 minutes to write down anything they want to about that lake and post it up on the board. You'll be surprised what your students know about lakes, what they don't know about lakes, what they think about lakes. You're going to have a student that's been to a lake. You're going to have a student that likes fishing. You're going to have a student that has a boat. You're going to have a student that likes swimming. Now you're building that interest. They're connected to this lake by what they know, what they don't know, what they've done, what they've seen. You're triggering that inquiry in them. You're triggering that inquiry in them. Okay, those are just 3 little examples of ways that you can put more inquiry into your lessons. Problem finding. Having your students find problems can be as important as having them learn to solve problems, because finding a problem is inherently one of the first steps to solving it. Example coming from the band director world. Allowing your students to listen back to recordings of themselves while looking at their music and try to identify things that they're hearing that may be wrong. This helps to build their aural skills. This helps to build their mastery of the musical elements. Hey, Mr. Skillern, we were playing loud at this part when it says piano on my part. Or I played 1 and a 2 when it says 1 and 2. Then from there, can they troubleshoot their own playing? Well, I need to circle that rhythm and then remember it. And incorporate that troubleshooting into your verbal feedback. Trumpets, that C sharp sounds really sketchy. What can we do about that? Oh, I can kick out, or that not C sharp, that D sounds really sketchy. I'm a percussionist, sorry, brass players. That D sounds really sketchy. What can we do about it? Well, I can kick out my third valve slide. Will that work? Let's try it. Now it's not so sharp. Hey, you just troubleshooted your own problem. Allowing students to create their own roadmap when they are working on a product for you. The students know what's hard about the learning more than you do. When they're learning a new choreography, they know what part of that process is hard for them. Let them plan one of the rehearsals. They'll tell you what they need. Your students know what part of the creative process, when they're making their dioramas and visual art, they know what part of that process is hard for them. Let them plan 1 or 2 of the lessons in your unit and see what they say, see what problem they find for themselves and see their solutions for it. The challenges, we talked about challenges. Are we challenging our students regularly? Long-term challenges I like because they provide great opportunities for reflection. And also short-term challenges because they provide great opportunities for action because they're more measurable in the short term. And I have written here that you should try to challenge your students in ways that are not connected to the arts sometimes. If your students are not bringing their materials to dance class often, maybe you challenge them to be responsible in a different way. Maybe you say, I challenge you to come say hello to me at lunch every day for the next 5 days. You're just teaching them how to build consistency, and you're giving them a personal connection to you. Each one of them is going to face a different challenge within that goal of finding you. The provocation. Provocating, is that a word? A provocation is when you give students an opportunity to start their learning process. An example I gave you earlier with the Post-it note provocation. When you provoke your students, you're giving them a way to react to a certain topic in a way that only they're going to do it. When you put a picture up on your board and you let them post Post-it notes about what they're doing. When you ask the students a controversial question. I know during a music tech unit, we were learning about DAWs. And we quickly realized that you can make every single instrument sound by clicking a mouse or pressing a key or using a MIDI controller. So I asked them, lesson 3, why do we need to learn how to play instruments if we could all just learn piano and play literally anything with a MIDI controller? Students could have argued for the rest of the class about that. We had students with old parents like me that were saying, all the old music has instruments. All this new music is just computers. And we had students that were kind of tech guys saying, yeah, I don't need to leave my room and go play trumpet outside. I can write this whole piece on my phone on GarageBand right now. You know, we had students that say, what's the point of painting? All of the art that I consume is photoshopped anyway. All of the art that I see is digital. What's the point of learning how to make movies in visual art class? These TikToks are getting more viewers than any movie's ever gonna get. There's no movies where 10 million people are watching it the first week. Maybe, but I don't know. In dance class, do we still need to learn ballet when all the K-pop groups are dancing hip hop? No one's getting rich off pirouettes anymore, but they are getting rich from, okay, excuse me, oh no, I'm not here to dance, sorry. And then you're gonna have that one student who's taking lessons on the weekends that's gonna say, no, ballet is super important because it's the foundations of dance. Then you're gonna have that other student that says, I don't care about the foundations of dance. I wanna make TikTok videos and that is this type of dancing. Why do I care about doing pirouettes? Why do I care about ballroom dancing? Using problems is another great way to provoke your students. Choir, there's 100 people sitting in this auditorium and they're bored. What do? Someone's going to say, well, we start singing. At that moment, you've got that student, more or less, they want to sing now because that's the answer to a problem. They solved a problem with their singing. Is your art solving a problem? Dance class, we need to get from A to B and the floor is lava. Well, we can lay down a piece of wood and balance on it. Maybe now they're doing gymnastics. We can jump. Oh, now it's how do we jump? It's a far jump. How do we remain balanced when we land? You're provoking them with a problem. Provocations did that. Next is voice and choice. Is your class a dictatorship? Sometimes it has to be. But sometimes maybe it shouldn't be. If your students don't like Picasso, maybe you can pick another artist. If your students don't like the song they're singing, maybe you can pick another piece that still hits what you need. Maybe it's still 2 parts. Maybe it's still SSAA. Maybe it's still a slow piece for festival. Let your students have voice and choice in the what of their learning. Are they interested in their own identity? You know, you can make any concept work for any learning experience for the most part. Are they more interested in finding beauty or the concept of change? Maybe during COVID, you're focusing on change because you know they're all impacted by something. Everyone in your class's life has changed. Voice and choice in the what of learning. the genre. Those students in dance were interested in hip hop. Can you still put your show on by incorporating some more modern dance techniques into what they're doing? Can you show them a Misty Copeland video to give them someone that maybe looks like some of them that's performing in these ways? This is very similar or in line with differentiating based on interest. Give your students some voice and choice in the what of learning. Let your students plan that lesson for the day. Give them voice and choice in the how of learning. Do your students need the whole period to paint? Maybe you can sacrifice one lesson, half a lesson. Do your students need a recovery day in dance class where you lead them through some yoga or some guided stretching, where they're still learning, they're still working collectively, and they're working towards their goal? Do your students need to experience theatrical art outside of the play that they're learning? Do a show and tell where your students find 3-minute clips from their favorite movies, shows, TV that are school appropriate, of course, and you're still achieving your same end goal. Let them differentiate the how of learning. And then let them have voice and choice in the when of their learning. Students, we have a concert on December 12th. We need to have 2 playing tests so I can check your progress. When do you want them? They'll tell you when it works for them. Students, we need to take photos of each other for our self-portrait unit. When's a good day to do that? They'll tell you. You don't want to take pictures of the students and they come to school looking busted that day when they could have prepared, Students, when should we introduce jumps into our new routine? Give them an option. We can do it this week or we can do it next week. Maybe you've got 4 students in your dance class who have a volleyball tournament this weekend and they're worried about it. That student that's not participating, you don't know what they have going on. If you gave them more voice and choice, they might tell you. I recently had a student who wanted to come. His music class got taken away because the students were preparing for a presentation for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for his birthday. This particular student is Arab by blood, but born and raised in America until now. He does not speak Arabic. He has limited connection to Islam. We gave him the choice. You can go to your prescribed music class now, or you can join the assembly. He chose to come to my music class and join the assembly at some other time because he struggles finding that connection. So we let that student choose. You can come to music this day, but when they do this same thing again in 2 days, you'll go to that. We let him balance that out for himself so that he's not pulling his hair out, trying to do this. Another thing I have here is the concept of grasp, that goal, role, audience, product, situation. I think I spelled grasp wrong. Goal, role, audience, grasp, situation, product. What is the role of your students? You're giving them a role. From that point, when you tell the students, we are photographers, you're putting them in the shoes of a photographer. By giving them that personal experience, you are helping them differentiate. What would I do if I was a photographer? What would I do if I was an author? What would I do if I was a musician? What would I do if I was a choreographer? And then lastly, the teaching cycle. I'm a musician, so this could be music focused, but in a book by Robert Duke that I love called Intelligent Music Teaching, he talks about the concept of the teaching cycle. What that is you provoke a student response, you give feedback to that student, and then you have the student perform that same provocation again, hopefully better. That's differentiation in itself because you're giving feedback to those students and you're planning your next steps based on their performance. The teaching cycle. It could work for visual arts. You ask your student to draw a flower, you have 10 minutes. Okay? Then you receive that. Then you show them 10 pictures of flowers. Then you ask them to draw a flower again. Then they're going to draw a flower again with some elements of it. And then you give them feedback. You can now say, now maybe draw your flower when the sun's shining, right? And based on what they give you, you're kind of changing your next steps. All right. I know that was a whirlwind. I just spoke for about an hour. I'm going to try to make a succinct blog post that hits some of the keys here. But just to recap, the big keys here are concept-based learning. If you want the students to achieve something bigger than themselves, they've got to be learning based on something that's bigger than that piece of music. They got to learn. They have to be learning something that's bigger than that one dance routine. My bigger are concepts. Are we teaching self-portraits or are we teaching identity? Are we rehearsing or are we thinking creatively and going through the process? Are we practicing photography or are we developing? Are we painting landscapes or are we communicating? Are we playing this band piece or are we identifying and appreciating beauty? Are we developing photos or are we representing change? Find some ways for those concepts to work in your rooms. Remember, differentiation is relevant to the students. It's rigorous. It's not easier for the lower achieving students in that particular time or harder for the higher achieving students. It's student-centered, okay? You can differentiate by what the students are ready for. Give them something they're not ready for on lesson 3. You let them get comfortable with working with clay. Now switch it up and make them work with sand. Can they still manipulate that? Can they still talk about the concept of identity with a change in their medium? You just differentiate it by taking them from something they were ready for to something they weren't. You can differentiate by interest, learner profile, let them be knowledgeable. But then day 2, let them be a risk taker walking to the unknown. Let them be principled in individual work, but then let them be caring in group work. Let them be reflective about their own work, but then let them inquire about the future by setting goals. You can differentiate by the effect. Do something that's going to get at those heartstrings. Have them do a monologue based on their family. Have them do an improv scene based on a negative topic, like my cat died, or maybe not something so bleak, but I lost my lunch card. Let them get affected in a different way. Differentiate based on the content. Switch it up. Play a popular music tune in band. Sing a jazz chart in choir. Write a comic strip in art. I don't know. Do a freestyle dance lesson. Switch up your process. Differentiate your process. Okay. Allow the students to show their learning with different products. Change up the learning environments. Okay. Use some different methods like centers, flexible grouping, independent study, tiered learning, where you may have students working on the same task at different difficulties. This is really easy in band class because you can have things that are flute heavy and low brass light, right? Inquiry, use inquiry. Let the questions guide the students' learning. Let them form their own questions. Ask them open-ended questions to give them a personal connection to what they're doing. Problem finding. Let them reflect on their own learning and find problems. Challenges. Give your students challenges to where they're all going to respond differently. I challenge you to choose your favorite measure in this piece of music. You just highlighted a section that the kids are going to practice. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them might. Provoke your students. Give them the opportunity to get inspired. Give them the opportunity to get interested. Oftentimes, we jump into these units without even giving our students the opportunity to care. What does every movie do before it comes out? They give you a trailer. You saw that trailer. Now you've got to go see it. They don't just say Batman's coming out on Thursday. No, they let you see 2 minutes of it. Do that for your students. Voice and choice. Let your students collaborate with you on the what, the how, and the when. Collaboration is essential in every single job that there is. Why do we not do it between us and our students? Teachers, you're your students outside of their family. Yet we're the last ones that mirror collaboration. Let them collaborate. The what, the when, and the how. Let them collaborate that. Use performance tasks with your students. Grasp, goal, role, audience, situation, product. Assign your students a role. You're not a 5th grader, you're a graphic designer. You're not a 7th grader, you're a choreographer. We're choreographing a dance. You're not a 10th grader, you're a photographer. You're not a 6th grader, you're a trumpeter. Let me fix my glasses. Trumpeteers. Let the student performance guide your next steps. If all of the students' paintings have weird looking eyes, spend 2 lessons on drawing eyes. The teaching cycle. Yeah. Thank you. Find something in this that you can use tomorrow to start differentiating how you're doing your teaching. As always, thank you for coming back to our weekly webinar series, Wisdom Wednesdays, at Common Time Online. You can find us on Common Time Online /blog, on Facebook at Common Time Online. Our 2 groups, Common Time for Artists, Common Time for Educators, on LinkedIn at Common Time Online, on Instagram at commontime.online, and you can always reach me personally at michael@commontime.online. Yes, michael@commontime.online. Thank you to the people that wrote the IB Principles to Practice books, and also to Tanya Latanzio for enlightening me to this world of differentiation. I hope you learned something. Thank you to those who joined, and future thanks to those who didn't and are going to watch in their own time. See how I differentiated the process? Some of you learned about differentiation right now. Some of you are going to eat it spoonful by spoonful. You see, I'm practicing what I preach, folks. And hopefully with this information, you will too. Thank you all.